Hey everyone, I'm Jorge Brites, and together with my co-host Arman Bagdasarov, we're excited to welcome you to the QP podcast. Our mission is to dive deep into meaningful conversations about fitness, health, bust myths, and explore tools and strategies to help you navigate the fitness space and ultimately reach your goals. For our first episode, we are honored to have Dr. Christle Guevarra joining us. Dr. Guevara is a renowned medical expert in metabolic health and obesity management. She's highly respected for her work with GLP-1 medications, her patient-first approach, and her commitment to ethical practices in both medicine and coaching. On this episode, we're talking about GLP-1 medications. We're starting with what they are and who they're for. Then we're moving into ethical boundaries for coaches, navigating the line between coaching and medical advice. After that, we're talking about the gray market. What are the legal and moral concerns around sourcing GLP-1 drugs outside of the prescription channels? And we're finishing off with potential risks. Are these medications safe for fitness goals? What are the side effects of GLP-1 medications, either as NEs? We're also throwing in there some humor, so be on the lookout for that. That all being said, we hope that you enjoy this conversation as much as we did.
Exploring tomorrow.
No.
Exploring tomorrow.
Isn't that what you're here for?
Yeah. So I sent you the outline of the conversation.
Yeah.
If at any point during this conversation you feel like there's something you don't want to talk about, or you feel like might get you in trouble with your license or whatever, like feel free to just let us know, like you don't want to talk about that.
Honestly, and I was just talking to Mike about this. I'm kind of at the point now where I just don't give a fuck. In the sense of there's so much misinformation out there. Physicians are pissed that other types of mid-level practitioners are making all sorts of wackadoodle claims. You have chiropractors, you have naturopaths, you have all, and even RDs and physicians making dumb claims that the whole, I'm worried about what somebody's going to think about me. Yeah, I'm over it. Go ahead and attack me, do whatever you want. Go ahead and complain about me. I actually just don't give a fuck anymore. That's kind of where I'm at. And if I don't know something, I don't know something. And I'm actually really excited to do this because I think you are asking some really tough questions. And I think it's time to stop shying away from, having a conversation about it. So.
For sure. I was more thinking on the medical license side of things. If there's anything you shouldn't be, just putting out there.
Yeah.
Go take drugs off of websites.
No, but I mean, it's hard because I've seen the things that physicians talk about on Facebook, in closed groups, but you're still putting that out there on the internet. And it's just wild to me, some of the information being in the sort of fitness space, the online, and then also the bodybuilding space, and just hearing sort of the judgment and the tone and what they constitute as sound advice to give to patients. No wonder we're all fucking confused, right? So I say, bring it on.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll record an official introduction after this.
Okay.
We'll still introduce you, but I guess we might as well get started. Jorge, before we do you want to say anything or?
No, okay. I think we can get started right away. Just Christle, again, thank you for being here. I don't know if you know this, but you are the first guest that we have for the podcast. So excited that you're here, and again, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. You mentioned yourself. The thing is, even for us coaches, I was just telling Arman the other day, I have quite a few clients that just have so many questions and just fears because of not knowing exactly what the side effects are of these drugs. Also, the judgment that's just being placed on social media. It's just crazy. So hopefully we can bring some light in this conversation.
Awesome. Yay. Looking forward to it.
Okay. So let's get started. So Christle, welcome to Quantum PP. That's Quantum Physiques podcast, Quantum PP for short. And so you are our first guest. And today we're going to be talking about GLP-1 drugs and coaching ethics. And I think this is going to be an interesting topic because there's lots of conversations out there about these drugs, but not specifically on how coaches should approach this matter with their clients who potentially might need it or not, or how to determine these things. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But I think it's important to just everything we talk about today. I think it's important to remember that our number one priority is the client's safety, their health, their success. And so, despite what our feelings are personally about the matter, we just want to make sure that we make the most ethical and best decisions for the client. So that's kind of the encompassing theme of everything we talk about today. So a quick true or false before we start. So yeah, this is a surprise. I didn't tell you this is coming up.
What if I get this wrong? Are you going to kick me off?
No, I'm not testing you. It's more just your opinion. And then if we can cover these topics or these questions in more detail later. And there'll be another surprise. I'll keep you guessing a little bit later. Okay, so true or false? GLP-1 pills are just as effective and safe as a weekly injection.
Ooh, you have effective and safe in there.
Mhm.
I think on the safety issue, yes. Effectiveness, there are some caveats to that, but I guess overall I would pick true.
Okay, thank you. Okay, true or false? Once starting GLP-1s, they need to be taken forever to sustain the weight loss.
It's not always true, so I'm going to say false.
Okay. True or false? GLP-1s lead to muscle loss.
Oh, that's false.
Okay. True or false? Buying GLP-1s off of gray market websites, and we're going to refer to like peptide sites and other sites like that as gray market, are safer than buying weight loss pills off of infomercials or off of an infomercial.
And there's been some really, and I grew up in the late 1900s, so I'm actually not quite sure about that. I'm actually not quite sure.
Okay. Yeah. So just a quick funny story. I remember when those commercials came on, and I had my first job at 14. I was a chubby kid growing up, and so I actually purchased some of those pills off the website. And I remember I think it was like a automatic reoccurring order, and they ended up charging me again. And I was so upset because like my account was in the negative. I was like this 14-year-old. Anyway.
No. Yeah. I'd actually. Yeah. I'm not quite sure. I am.
Okay, and last one, true or false? GLP-1s pose serious health risks for certain populations.
For certain populations, yes. Depending on family history, yes, true.
Great. I'm excited to potentially cover those in more detail a little bit later. So,
okay, all right.
All right, so let's jump into it. There are, again, tons of conversations on GLP-1s, so I don't want to just go into just a general conversation about this, but maybe in a couple minutes, if you can briefly explain what GLP-1 drugs are and how they work.
Yeah. Do you want me to do that right now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So GLP-1 drugs originally designed to help with diabetes. So we have two hormones that are produced in our gut. So the glucagon-like peptide 1, in addition to gastric inhibitory peptide, GIP, which I don't know if we'll get into that, but they're both two hormones that are produced in the gut. So as we ingest food, goes through, our esophagus, goes into our stomach, and then gets spit out into our small intestines. And the cells that line our small intestine detect that we have food passing through. And so in order to help signal to the pancreas that we need insulin to utilize those carbohydrates, utilize that glucose, and, put it to, good use to our skeletal muscle and all sorts of other things, the cells release the GLP-1 hormone. And then that signal goes to the pancreas, and the pancreas releases some insulin into our bloodstream. And so the drugs were originally designed such that the problem is that the half-life of these gut hormones are pretty short. So you're thinking less than 5 minutes. And so in order to help increase that signal to the pancreas to produce more insulin, if we can find a drug that can sort of evade the enzyme and hit the receptors so it can do its biological signaling, we're in the money, right, as far as diabetes go. So the additional things that started to make this a little bit more attractive as far as a weight loss perspective goes, there are GLP receptors in our brain that help with satiety, hunger signaling, and whatnot. And then there are also, it slows down gastric emptying. So keeps that stomach keeps the food in our stomach longer, which also helps with satiety. So as these drugs kept getting developed over the, last, the first FDA approved drug in the class was approved in the early 2000s. So over the last 20 years, we've really improved on how the drug has been delivered and how much of an effect it has on weight loss. By the time 2017 rolled around, you have semaglutide, Ozempic, Wegovy sort of coming onto the market and really making a big splash in sort of the weight loss, scene. And then that's sort of like been the rise to popularity combined with social media.
Interesting. Okay. So these GLP-1 hormones are produced naturally, and the drugs that we take basically kind of help prolong those effects because naturally the half-life is very short. You said less than 5 minutes. Interesting. Okay. So when someone starts taking these drugs, do they build up a tolerance and end up having to take more and more down the line?
So it's not necessarily, I think people start to have a tolerance for the side effects more so than the actual effectiveness. I have yet to see somebody who, down the line, I don't see the the increased tolerance like somebody would for like a stimulant based medication, like phentermine or, just even caffeine. I know how caffeine tolerance people tend to really build up and the effectiveness wears down. So I have yet to see some sort of like tolerance where like I've been on this drug for months or years and like now my hunger is like out of control and all of a sudden I'm eating anything and everything. So I have yet to see that.
Okay, interesting. You said a tolerance for the side effects. What did you mean by that?
So yeah, great question. When people typically start these medications, they start it off on a very, very low dose. The smallest dose is, a quarter of a milligram once a week. And some of the most common side effects that people do experience on these medications, nausea, sometimes vomiting, are the two biggest ones with the GLP-1 agonist medications. And so by starting with the lowest dose, you can sort of minimize the most common side effect. And then from there, really, kind of playing around with the dosing to see what would be a good place for somebody to, one, have a caloric deficit, but also like not be vomiting everything up and like feeling like they can't function because they're so, nauseous all the time.
Okay, so in this case, building up a tolerance is a really positive thing.
Yeah, for side effects, and not
Right.
necessarily for the hunger signaling, if that makes sense.
Right, right. Okay, great. Jorge, do you have any follow-up questions on any of what we just covered?
No, I think that's very clear. It's very interesting, and it kind of aligns with what some of my clients have told me, which is quite positive. So far,
Awesome.
like, yeah, at the beginning they feel a little bit nauseous here and there, but then it's like they do keep getting the most out of the medication. They're not feeling as, maybe sick, if that's a word. So I mean, so far that's sounds like very positive. That's nice.
Good.
So let's jump into kind of like the meat and potatoes of the conversation. So when, if ever, would it be appropriate for a coach to recommend a client consider GLP-1 drugs?
So I think it's always good to be an advocate for your clients. I realize that there are, navigating the medical system here in America can sometimes be really difficult. Like, let's face it, physicians are overworked, overburdened. The amount of administrative tasks that physicians are asked to do without additional help or pay is sort of insane. And so that translates to unfortunately, being able to spend less time with the patient. So I think it's always good to encourage your clients to like have those conversations, even if I think one of the things to consider is, I guess this is speaking from my own personal experience. I have always sort of failed at maintenance, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
and I could never actually finish a diet. So a 12-week fat loss diet has always been very difficult. I've tried to play around with shorter diets, changing the rate of fat loss, and then really trying to bump up, keeping my food palatability super low and like the fiber content super high. And just things just didn't seem to kind of stick. And if you ask me, it's just always like, I'm super hungry. I'm super ravenous. I'm not functioning at work. I have to like put 4 meals, my diet meals, into one meal just so I can figure out how to function throughout the like, I would just, so I could get through teaching. And then I would just be hungry, like a hungry, person just sitting on the couch doing nothing for the rest of the day. So I think those are kind of, maybe signs to consider. Hey, like, have you talked to your doctor about any medication? Because it's not just the GLP-1 agonists. There's a whole host of other medications to consider. And, as far as like weight loss and weight management goes. So I think those are some signs to, to consider with your clients to like kind of gently, broach the subject of like, hey, have you talked to a doctor about this? Like, maybe there's something else that that you can bring to the table, put the tool in your toolbox so you can, do these other things and also be a productive person in society and not feel like every time you diet, you're just going to be a vegetable on the couch.
That's
Good
that,
points.
thanks for sharing that, Christle. That's actually very interesting because personally, and I'm not sure about you, Arman, but there's always this stigma with people who have lived overweight. But like, for example, I've coached many people who, so I mean, basically, going back to my original statement. What I'm trying to say is that there's this stigma that people who are overweight are not really trying. They're not really willing to put in the effort. But like personally, I don't see that correlation. I've coached many people who work really hard,
Mhm.
are very successful in their careers
Yeah.
with their business, right?
Mhm.
But at the same time, they do struggle and they do try. So I think it's really important to just again, I think this is a good avenue to help those type of people because it's
Mhm.
not at times it's not about willpower, right?
Mhm.
It's actually just something genetic, right?
Mhm. Oh, I
Yeah.
agree. I agree completely. I guess there and for a long time I had felt that ego and that stigma, and I didn't. My doctor recommended trying out Wegovy, and I said no in 2020. I was well, one, my insurance didn't cover it, and two, it was sort of like maybe a needle. I don't feel really great about needles once a week, but then there was still this like pervasive thing of like I'm a smart person. I think I just finished medicine. Like I think I can like grind pretty hard. Do the 30-hour on call shifts. Like, why can't I just do this one thing? And so it took about 2 years for me to like, put the sword down and be like, okay, this is affecting my life. There are other solutions to consider. And like I should at the very least give this a good old college try and see what happens. And sure enough, it's been a life-changing experience, to be honest.
That's amazing. So you're currently on it right now.
Mhm. Correct. I've been on it since January of 2022.
Okay, awesome. And this is just kind of like
Yeah.
a side question real quick. So when you are not actively pursuing like a diet phase or a cut calorie
Yeah.
deficit, are you lowering your dose to like a baseline?
Correct. For myself, I try and keep the lowest sort of dose possible. And because also during maintenance, your calories are a little bit higher. And I want to make sure that like I'm eating my vegetables, I'm eating my fruits. Like I'm not like, just eating like, half of a couple nachos and like calling that a meal. So, and I think it's much harder to maintain that if you're still on the same doses that you were using, while you were in a caloric deficit. And I think that I don't know what your experience has been working with clients who have done fat loss phases, have done maintenance phases. Like, I hope that seems to be the general sentiment that has been going out to the fitness space, because I think from my end, it seems to be a little bit like, at least from what I hear from some of my colleagues, it's a mixed bag of like, some don't adjust the dose, some do, some just have no regard for what diet phase the person is in. So,
Right. And
Yeah,
I think Jorge had a thought.
yeah. So sorry, let me ask you something. Yeah, definitely. Like the people that I work with that use these medications, usually it's not that I tell them, but I just imply that, well, since we're not in a deficit anymore,
mhm.
maybe you should perhaps ask your physician. It
Yeah.
might be a good idea. And usually, it's
Yeah.
a good back and forward.
Oh,
The thing
good.
is actually getting the client to actually do the thing, take action.
Mhm.
But when they do it, it's good. I'd like to ask something
Yeah.
related to when it might be appropriate for a coach to maybe, tell a client to maybe look into these type of drugs or maybe talk to their physician about this. What would be your take on how would you determine whether it might be a good time to, or maybe a good potential person, when it would be good for a coach to tell a client to maybe reach out to their physician about this. And the reason I'm asking is because, maybe we have some people who are okay, they're actually putting the work, but they just can't seem to adjust to the nutrition side of things. But
Mhm.
there are others that it's not just the nutrition side of things, but they're just not willing to even go to the gym or do any type of resistance training. And so, usually the thing is, if they end up taking these medications, there's a big risk that they also lose a lot of muscle. Do you
Mhm.
think there's any type of criteria for us to maybe say, hey, if you actually check these boxes and if you're consistent with your training, at least it might be worth to talk to a physician about this, or would you advise something else?
I think that's a really great place to start. I think in an ideal world, if you had like, this person has been consistent. I mean, I would even say at least 4 weeks, like this person went to the gym consistently twice a week. This person has consistently put in protein in like X amount of meals. I think any type of consistent behavior change for X amount of weeks. And if you really, um, you know, uh, if the person is starting from a really high body fat percentage and a really low musculoskeletal, you know, body habitus, I even think the conversation should start earlier versus later. Like the whole idea of like, I have to fail these other medications, I have to fail, X, Y, and Z before even considering. I think those conversations should start earlier, more so than like, okay, you got this, you got this, you got that, because there are people who, if that hunger signaling isn't, I realize there are levels to this. If that hunger signaling isn't just like shut down, what's the alternative? They don't exercise, they continue to eat with that high hunger signaling, continue to gain weight, puts them at risk for all these other comorbid conditions, heart disease, diabetes, and then it just, kind of goes from there. So I always ask, like, what's the alternative in these types of situations? I think if you have a general population patient or client who is starting from a very high body fat percentage, I think it's well worth even just starting that conversation off the bat. Like, let's see, have that in the works, even as you're kind of helping them navigate behavior change. Because it's really hard. It is hard in the beginning. When you're that detrained, you're, kind of, a lot of people are in this negative downward spiral, especially when you are, completely overweight, sedentary, like everything hurts. So I don't want to move, I don't want to do this. This is way too hard. I don't know if this is going to work for me. Like, I failed every diet. It is really hard to break out of that negative mindset. And so, man, and you've got the hunger on top of all of that. Like, it's a lot. So I'm a proponent of starting earlier rather than like waiting for people to like fail another diet or feel like they're failing, at being consistent. Start the conversation sooner rather than later.
Yeah,
Well,
a couple things to follow up on that.
Yeah.
No, that was great. I really appreciated that. I think first, like when a client comes to you in that position, they're already beaten down and kind of like, this is my last hope. Like, what do I do? And it's like, those are just terrible coaching practices to be like, well, just work harder, like eat less, like let me just take away your coaching, whatever. Like, there's not a license, but so yeah, those are really great suggestions. And to follow up with what Jorge was saying, as far as like what criteria to look at, do you think that someone could create like a potential, like a risk assessment type thing, or just some boxes to check off to see like, oh, okay, well, you scored this, so maybe you qualify to at least go to a doctor, and I think you should consider this? Because I've also had pretty overweight clients who, one guy lost over 100 pounds, and he was just on top of it. Like, he did great. It was just more of like a lack of knowledge and understanding. And, COVID happened. And once we kind of got good habits in place and training in place, like, he was super successful and he's fine. And others, unfortunately, don't have that experience. And that's the case for a lot of people. So what can we do for those individuals?
When things don't sort of, I think you can put together a small criteria list. Off the top of my head, I can't really, I'm not really quite sure I can visualize how that happens. I think it would also come with the client or patient population that I'm working with, because every single one is different, has their own kind of needs. The first thing I do is, like, when things don't go right, is really trying to figure out the why. Like, is it really because, you're really feeling hunger, or is it because, like, I just haven't really, managed my time effectively? And like having those hard, being compassionate, but also asking some tough questions, right? Like, I want to be able to help you in the best way possible. And I need to know what's going on. Otherwise, like, I can't figure out a solution, and I can't figure out a way for us to work together. But always figure out the why, like, what's going on, like, what's been going on in your life? Like, how's the family been? How has this situation been? I just had a client who has had like a pretty rough weekend, and even after she was done explaining to me, like, I'm going to the hospital and all this other stuff, and like worrying about, like, about her kids, it's like, hey, you still showed up today. You still showed up. You still got on that call with me. You still like did your weigh in. You sent that to me, and everything actually still looks really good. So I think just continuing to build that rapport with clients, but yeah, just trying to tease out like what's really going on. For a lot of people, it's like, oh, I went to a party. I went to, and that's okay. Life happens. But I wonder if it's, if you can do that, like, as far as a checkbox goes, I'm sure you could make that happen.
Okay. So earlier you mentioned, looking out for signs of consistency to kind of help determine that. So if they've at least been at this for 4 weeks, you mentioned consistently eating protein, right? That's not like something you're taking away. That's just more of them like adjusting their diet.
Right.
What are some other things along those lines that a coach could look out for?
I guess depending on like what their current diet looks like, are they cooking like their own meals? Are they eating their meals from home? That would be a great one to also consider.
Okay.
Do-
So,
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was about to ask, do you have hitting the gym consistently?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good one. So ultimately, you just want to make sure that they are putting forth effort to make this happen. And if they're doing all those things and they're still not able to be successful, then potentially there's something more, right? But before
Yeah.
they're putting in effort, it's just like, well, like
Yeah.
we don't know.
And depending on the starting point, yeah, like I said, depending on the starting point, I would probably also, I may encourage them to just go straight to your doctor. Like at a certain
Right.
body fat percentage, it's like, we should have this conversation like now.
One question that I like to
Yeah.
add on that, what do you think about maybe also including looking at family history?
Mhm.
Maybe asking like first, like what has been your past like? Have you been always overweight? Is it something recent? Maybe you grew up this way, and also like, are your parents overweight? Do you think that even like just like that people can take that from from their family members? And if so, what would be like the percentage if there's a rate?
So I think that's a really great question. I think the more you know about your clients, the better. I think it just leads to better conversations. What was the last part of that question? My bad.
Yeah, no. What would be like if there's this data, right? Or maybe your own opinion, what would be the percentage of probability to someone to experience, let's say, becoming overweight if, let's say, their parents were overweight?
That's a great question. Most times I've seen a pretty high percentage of, if the parents are overweight, usually the kids, or like, or if you're an adult, like grandparents or, their parents, I see a pretty high correlation between that. That said, my parents are actually have not like, my mom has struggled a little bit, but she has always been a smaller frame than me. So I have always grown up feeling like, wow, I feel like a double failure. Like my mom is in shape and like is skinny, and I am like this chubby kid. What the hell? What did I do wrong to get these genetic cards? But more often than not, I would say definitely so in the general population.
Well, that's not a concern anymore because I've seen the photos you post and you've just been in a bulk. Like you just have like
A
super
20-year
jacked.
bulk, 40-year bulk. No, we're in a different frame. I take my dad's frame anyway, so I should have been paying attention to my dad anyway. So
There you go.
Oh, speaking of how jacked you are, my wife told me to say hello, and she was like really likes following you, and it's really cool to see you lift heavy and all this stuff. So
oh my God, thank you so much.
big fan, big fan.
Oh, thanks. Well,
Okay.
tell her I said hello.
I will. I'll let her know. Okay, so let's move on to the gray market, and there are a few different aspects of this I want to talk about, right? Because there are probably ethical considerations, maybe moral considerations, potentially legal considerations. So let's start with the expense of acquiring these drugs if someone qualifies. So let's say that you have a client, you see some signs that they may qualify or benefit from this drug. They go seek out their doctor, they get approved, but they just can't afford the expense of these drugs. Earlier, you mentioned some other potential alternatives. So maybe you can touch on that, the cost of those, and what someone can do if they just can't afford the drugs.
Yeah, the cost right now, I've seen insurance companies vary widely on how much gets covered. I've seen some patients who have the drug completely covered, and that's great. That's dandy. I think the last time I checked, the cash pay price was somewhere on the order of like 800 to 1,000, but that was like a year or so ago. So I can't, I don't know if it had actually gone down. I've also had have patients who have been able to have it prescribed and ordered directly from the pharmaceutical company. And that with the coupon, I've seen it around 500, 550 for tirzepatide, Mounjaro, Zepbound, which is the GLP-1 GIP agonist medication. So it varies quite a bit as far as the FDA approved legal, or FDA approved route goes. So the nice thing about the pros of having it prescribed from an FDA approved, source is you have a much lower risk of contamination happening. I think is a huge one. The dosing is a lot more standardized. The packaging is a lot more standardized. The instructions are standardized. And I think that about ends my pros, as far as the FDA approved route goes. And then as far as the gray market goes, you have the peptide sciences, like peptide websites that you mentioned, but then there's also compounding pharmacies. So they are able to they are able to kind of also be a part of, the market. And I think they actually represent an important part of the market, particularly when the manufacturers, the shortages were happening somewhere around 2022, 2023. I know there was a lot of hubbub on the news about like, Ozempic being, out of stock or whatnot, like we have to save it for the diabetics, what have you. So I know that since then there have been more manufacturing facilities that have been kind of put up since then to meet the demand. But compounding pharmacies also have their place, particularly with when drug shortages are apparent. So that's also another avenue to consider that is available. And I feel like it's less of a stigma because now I see physicians even talking about it on the internet, which, says a lot because I feel like we can be very judgmental about what people say on the internet.
Right. So I've
Yeah.
actually never heard of compounding pharmacies. What are they? Can anybody access them? Do you need a prescription? How does that work?
You still need a prescription. You still need a prescription from a licensed either physician, depending on what state you're in, physician assistant or nurse practitioner can also write prescriptions. You can, and so the compounding pharmacies are legal. They just don't have the same regulations, particularly with manufacturing practices. They aren't subjected to as much strict regulation as a FDA approved, kind of manufacturing facility. So that's like one of the bigger things to keep in mind. So I feel like the compounding pharmacies may have some similar.
If you're hearing this, you aren't part of our Quantum Physiques school group. If you'd like to join at no personal expense, you can get access to the full-length version of this podcast, along with resources such as training, nutrition guides, advice from qualified coaches, and access to a community of welcoming individuals on the path to improving their fitness. So hit the link in the show notes and we'll see you inside. And if there's something we missed or other topics you'd like our guests to cover, please let us know in the comments so that we can have them back on.